On the morning of January 28, 1595, a Venetian diplomat named Lorenzo Bernardo stood on a balcony overlooking the ceremonial road between Topkapi Palace and the great mosque of Hagia Sophia in Constantinople. He had served as Venice's ambassador to the Ottoman court for 2 years. He had witnessed executions, military parades, and the elaborate rituals of the most powerful Islamic empire on earth. But nothing had prepared him for what he saw that morning. A funeral procession emerged from the palace gates. Not one coffin, not two, 19. 19 small cypress wood caskets, each draped in green silk embroidered with verses from the Quran, each carried by palace eunuchs dressed in white mourning robes. The coffins were not uniform. Some were so small they could be carried by a single man. Others, slightly larger, required 2 bearers. Behind them walked the Sultan's mother, Safiye Sultan, surrounded by veiled women of the Imperial Harem whose wailing echoed off the stone walls of the palace complex. Bernardo watched in stunned silence as the procession moved slowly toward Hagia Sophia, where the bodies would be interred in the royal tombs beside their father, Sultan Mehmed III, who had died just 2 days earlier. The ambassador turned to his secretary and dictated a single sentence that would be dispatched to Venice within the week. The new sultan has, according to custom, strangled all 19 of his brothers to secure the throne. According to custom, as if the systematic murder of 19 children, ranging in age from 11 years old to an infant still nursing at his mother's breast, could ever be reduced to mere tradition. But in the Ottoman Empire of the late 16th century, this was not an aberration. It was law. The Kanun-i Katl, the law of fratricide legally codified by Sultan Mehmed II more than a century earlier, explicitly stated that any sultan ascending the throne had the right, and indeed the obligation, to execute all male siblings to prevent civil war. And so, in the span of a single night, 19 boys died in the gilded chambers of Topkapi Palace, not by poison, not by the blade, but by silk bowstrings pulled tight around their throats by deaf-mute executioners who could neither hear their screams nor speak of what they had done. 19 princes whose only crime was being born into the House of Osman, 19 futures extinguished before they had even begun. How did this happen? How did an empire that prided itself on justice and Islamic piety legalize the murder of children? Who were these brothers, and what were their final moments like? And why did the man who ordered their deaths, Sultan Mehmed III, believe he had no choice? This is that story. Every detail you are about to hear is documented in Ottoman court chronicles, Venetian diplomatic dispatches preserved in the State Archives of Venice, and European eyewitness accounts written by ambassadors who stood, as Lorenzo Bernardo did, and watched 19 coffins pass in solemn procession. These boys deserve to be remembered, not as footnotes to Ottoman succession law, but as children whose lives were stolen in the name of political stability. Now let us return to the moment when their fates were sealed. Before we continue this documented historical tragedy, if you seek true medieval and early modern history told from primary sources without sensationalism or mythology, subscribe to Regal Sins, hit subscribe, press the notification icon, and join us as we honour the forgotten victims of institutional cruelty. Now, let us return to the Ottoman Empire in 1595. To understand how 19 children could be legally murdered in a single night, you must first understand the history of Ottoman succession and the blood-soaked logic that created the law of fratricide. The Ottoman Empire, by the late 16th century, was the most powerful Islamic state in the world. It controlled vast territories spanning 3 continents: Anatolia, the Balkans, North Africa, the Levant, and the Arabian Peninsula. Its armies had conquered Constantinople in 1453, ending the Byzantine Empire. His navy dominated the Mediterranean. Its sultan was not merely a king, but the Caliph of Islam, a successor to the Prophet Muhammad, commander of the faithful. But this immense power came with a fundamental structural problem. The Ottomans had no clear law of primogeniture. Unlike European monarchies, where the eldest son automatically inherited the throne, Ottoman succession was theoretically open to any son of the reigning sultan. This was rooted in Turkish and Mongol traditions of shared sovereignty, where the most capable son, proven through military or administrative success, would claim leadership. In theory, this system rewarded merit. In practice, it created catastrophic civil wars. When Sultan Bayezid I died in 1403, his sons fought a brutal 11-year war for the throne that nearly destroyed the empire. Villages were razed, armies clashed, tens of thousands died. When the dust settled, one son, Mehmed I, emerged victorious, but the empire had been shattered. His grandson, Mehmed II, who would later conquer Constantinople, vowed this would never happen again. In 1478, he codified a new law written into the Kanun, the Ottoman legal code. The law stated, in chillingly plain language, "Whichever of my sons inherits the Sultanate, it behooves him to kill his brothers in the interest of the world order." Most jurists have approved this. Let action be taken accordingly. The justification was pragmatic. One death, or 5 or 10, was preferable to a civil war that could kill thousands and destabilize an empire stretching from Hungary to Yemen. The law was also framed in Islamic legal terms. Ottoman jurists issued fatwas, religious rulings, declaring that fratricide was permissible under the principle of maslahah, public interest, to prevent fitna, civil strife. The Prophet Muhammad himself had warned against division among believers. Better, the jurists argued, to sacrifice a few princes than to plunge the Muslim world into chaos. The method of execution was equally calculated. Islamic law, derived from Quranic verses and Hadith traditions, forbids the spilling of royal blood. This prohibition, rooted in pre-Islamic Arabian customs of sacred kingship, was taken seriously by Ottoman legal scholars. The solution was strangulation. Silk bowstrings, soft and strong, were looped around the victim's neck and pulled tight. The silk left no visible wounds. The victim's blood remained within his body. Technically, the law was obeyed. The executioners themselves were carefully chosen. Deaf-mutes, men who could neither hear the final words of the dying nor speak afterward of what they had witnessed. They were known as bastantula, palace gardeners, though their true function was far darker. The first documented mass fratricide under this law occurred in 1451, when Mehmed II ascended the throne and had his infant half-brother drowned in a bath. His son, Bayezid II, executed his brother Cem after a long succession struggle. Sultan Selim I, known as Selim the Grim, killed his 2 brothers and multiple nephews. Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, celebrated in European courts as the greatest Ottoman ruler, had his own son Mustafa strangled on suspicion of plotting rebellion, and later his son Bayezid and Bayezid's 5 sons were executed in Persia after a failed revolt. By the time Sultan Murad III ascended in 1574, the law was routine. Murad had 5 brothers. All 5 were strangled on the day of his coronation. But Murad was extraordinarily prolific. Over his 21-year reign, he fathered more than 100 children through concubines in the Imperial Harem. Daughters posed no succession threat, but sons did. By the time of his death in January 1595, Murad had at least 20 surviving sons. The eldest, Mehmed, was 29 years old, serving as governor of the wealthy province of Manisa in Anatolia, the traditional training ground for crown princes. The youngest was an infant, born only months before Murad's death. Between them were 18 others, ranging from toddlers to pre-adolescent boys, and under the law of fratricide, every single one of them was doomed the moment their father's heart stopped beating. Shehzada Mehmed, the eldest son of Sultan Murad III, had spent most of his adult life preparing to inherit an empire he did not particularly want. Born in May 1566 at the Manisa Palace, Mehmed grew up during the height of Ottoman power. His father's reign saw victories in Persia, the annexation of the Caucasus, and the consolidation of Ottoman control over North Africa. But it was also a period of decadence. Murad, unlike his warrior ancestors, rarely left the palace. He became infamous for his obsession with the Imperial Harem, where he kept hundreds of concubines and fathered more children than any sultan before or since. Mehmed's mother was not the sultan's legal wife. Ottoman sultans rarely married after the mid-16th century, but a Venetian-born concubine originally named Cecilia Venia Baffo, who converted to Islam and took the name Safiye. Beautiful, intelligent, and ruthlessly ambitious, Safiye dominated Murad's affections for decades. As the mother of the crown prince, she held the title of Haseki Sultan, the sultan's favourite, and wielded immense influence over palace politics. European ambassadors noted that Safiye effectively controlled access to Murad, intercepting petitions, arranging appointments, and accepting bribes from foreign powers. Venetian dispatches describe her as cunning and calculating, a woman who understood that her power depended entirely on her son's succession. Mehmed, by contrast, was described as indolent and pleasure-seeking. Unlike his great-great-grandfather Suleiman, who led armies into battle, Mehmed showed little interest in military affairs. He preferred poetry, music, and the company of the hundreds of concubines and servants who populated his provincial court at Manisa. Ottoman tradition required crown princes to serve as provincial governors to gain administrative experience. Mehmed governed Manisa for over a decade, but European observers noted he delegated most responsibilities to viziers while he indulged in elaborate hunting expeditions and palace entertainments. The Venetian bailo Lorenzo Bernardo, writing in 1592, described Mehmed as of mediocre intelligence, given to pleasures, and entirely dominated by his mother. But Mehmed was not ignorant of what awaited him. He knew the law, He knew that the moment he became Sultan as Sultan, his 19 younger brothers would have to die. Some sources suggest he was haunted by this knowledge. The Ottoman court chronicler Mustafa Selaniki, writing years later in his Tarih-i Selaniki, recorded that Mehmed suffered from what we might now term anxiety and depression, often secluding himself in his private chambers for days. Whether this was moral anguish over the impending fratricide or simply fear of the immense responsibilities of the Sultanate, we cannot know with certainty, but we do know that in early January 1595, when word reached Manisa that his father was gravely ill, Mehmed did not rush to Constantinople. Sultan Mehmed III died on January 16, 1595, at approximately 49 years of age. The cause of death was recorded as a stroke, though some European sources speculated he had been poisoned. Court protocol demanded absolute secrecy when a sultan died, to prevent chaos or rebellion before the crown prince could arrive and secure the throne. Murad's body was prepared for burial, but the death was not announced. Meanwhile, urgent messengers galloped along the western Anatolian road toward Manisa, carrying sealed letters to Mehmed. The message was simple: "Your father is dead. The throne is yours. Come immediately." Mehmed departed Manisa on January 18th with a military escort of Janissaries, elite infantry troops loyal to the Sultan. The journey from Manisa to Constantinople took 9 days. During that time, Murad's death remained officially secret, though rumours spread quickly through the palace and the city. Safia Sultan, still in the Imperial Harem at Topkapi, worked behind the scenes to ensure her son's smooth succession. She coordinated with the Grand Vizier, Serdar Ferhad Pasha, and the Aga of the Janissaries to guarantee the loyalty of key military and administrative officials. Bribes were distributed, promises were made, and preparations began for what would happen the moment Mehmed entered the palace. On January 27, 1595, Mehmed arrived at Topkapi Palace. He was greeted by the Grand Vizier and led to the Privy Chamber, where he was dressed in the ceremonial kaftan of the Sultan. The sacred sword of Osman, founder of the dynasty, was girded around his waist. He received the oath of allegiance from the assembled viziers, military commanders, and religious officials. And then, in a private meeting with Serdar Ferhad Pasha and his mother Safiye, Mehmed was informed of the expectation: the law of fratricide must be executed immediately. His 19 brothers, confined in the Imperial Harem under the watch of eunuch guards, were waiting. What Mehmed said in that moment is not recorded, but what he did is documented and meticulous. The section of Topkapi Palace known as the cafes, the cage, was located in the harem complex behind walls of rose-coloured marble and latticed windows overlooking the Golden Horn. It was here that royal princes lived when not serving as provincial governors. The cafes was gilded, comfortable, and utterly inescapable. The princes had servants, tutors, concubines assigned to them, and every material luxury. What they did not have was freedom. They could not leave, they could not communicate with the outside world, and they certainly could not raise armies or challenge the crown prince. The cafes was a beautiful prison, designed to neutralize potential threats while maintaining the prince's dignity as members of the royal family. On the night of January 27, 1595, the cafes became a slaughterhouse. The orders came directly from the new sultan. The executions would be carried out by the Bostancella, the palace gardeners who served as executioners. These men, carefully selected for their deafness and muteness, entered the harem escorted by the chief black eunuch, the most powerful official in the household, responsible for guarding the sultan's concubines and children. European sources later described the chief eunuch as a towering African man named Osman Aga, whose loyalty to Safi Sultan was absolute. The princes were brought out one by one. The oldest, 11-year-old Shehzad Mustafa, was taken first. Ottoman court protocol demanded that executions follow a hierarchy of age. Whether Mustafa understood what was happening is unknown. Some historians speculate that the older princes had been warned by sympathetic servants or their mothers. Others suggest they were deceived, told they were being taken to meet their new sultan brother. What is certain is that Mustafa was led into a chamber prepared for the execution. The deaf-mute executioners approached. One held a silk bowstring, rolled into a loop. Another stood behind the prince to prevent resistance. The method was swift but not painless. The bowstring was slipped over the victim's head and pulled tight, constricting the windpipe and the carotid arteries. Death by strangulation typically takes 3 to 5 minutes, depending on the strength of the executioner and the resistance of the victim. The victim loses consciousness within seconds as blood flow to the brain is cut off, but the heart continues beating for several minutes. The body convulses, the face turns purple, the eyes bulge, and then silence. The body was wrapped in white linen and placed in a prepared coffin. The executioners moved to the next chamber. One by one, the brothers died. Shehzada Mahmud, age 10, Shehzada Ahmed, age 9, Shehzada Osman, age 7, Shehzada Bayezid, age 6, Shehzada Cihangir, age 5. The names blur together in the Ottoman chronicles, recorded with clinical detachment. Some of the younger children reportedly cried and called for their mothers, who were confined in adjoining chambers of the harem. The concubines, each of whom had borne a son to Sultan Murad, were forced to wait in their rooms, knowing what was happening but powerless to intervene. To resist would mean their own deaths, and the harem guards had strict orders to prevent any interference. The infant prince posed a particular problem. He was too young to have been named in the records, simply referred to as the youngest son. European sources, including the account of Venetian secretary Matteo Zain, state that this infant was still nursing and had to be taken from his mother's arms by force. According to these accounts, his mother, a Circassian concubine, begged the chief eunuch to spare the child, arguing that he posed no threat to the throne. The eunuch refused. The infant was carried to the execution chamber. The silk bowstring was looped around his neck. The method was the same, though the victim was so small that the entire act took less than a minute. By dawn on January 28th, all 19 princes were dead. Their bodies, washed according to Islamic burial custom and wrapped in white shrouds, were placed in cypress wood coffins lined with green silk. The coffins were arranged by size in the palace courtyard, and at sunrise the funeral procession began. The chief white eunuch, responsible for male pages and administrative staff, led the procession. Behind him walked the coffin bearers, followed by the Sultan's mother Safiye and the concubines of the deceased Sultan Murad, all dressed in mourning white and veiled. The procession moved slowly through the palace gates, past the Janissary barracks, and along the ceremonial road toward Hagia Sophia. This was the moment Lorenzo Bernardo witnessed from his balcony. Other European observers were equally stunned. An anonymous Habsburg diplomat wrote in a dispatch dated February 2nd, 1595, "The cruelty of the Turks exceeds all measure. The new Sultan, upon his accession, has ordered the murder of 19 of his own brothers, some mere infants. They were strangled with silk cords and buried with their father in Hagia Sophia. This barbarous custom continues among them, and though they justify it by the law, it is an abomination before God and man." French traveller Jean Palerme, who was in Constantinople at the time, described the city's atmosphere in his memoir, Peregrinations. The people of Constantinople whispered fearfully about the great slaughter in the palace. Even the Janissaries, hardened soldiers who had seen countless battles, were disturbed by the number of princes killed. Mothers in the city held their children closer, fearing what kind of ruler would emerge from such an act. Inside Topkapi Palace, the surviving records suggest that Sultan Mehmed III was deeply affected by what he had ordered. The court chronicler Selaniki wrote that Mehmed secluded himself in his private chambers for 3 days after the executions, refusing to meet with advisors or participate in public ceremonies. Some historians interpret this as guilt. Others suggest it was strategic, allowing the shock of the fratricide to settle before resuming normal governance. What is documented is that Mehmed's mother, Safiye Sultan, took effective control of the government during this period, issuing orders through the Grand Vizier and managing the transition of power. The bodies of the 19 princes were interred in the mausoleum of Sultan Murad III, located in the courtyard of Hagia Sophia. The mausoleum, magnificent octagonal structure covered in Iznik tiles and calligraphy, was designed by the Imperial architect Davud Aga. Inside, the coffins were arranged around the central tomb of Murad himself. European travellers who visited their mausoleum in subsequent decades noted the rows of small tombs, each marked with a turbaned headstone indicating a royal prince. Today the mausoleum still stands, and visitors can see the 19 graves arranged in somber rows. It remains the largest documented mass royal burial in Ottoman history. But the horror did not end with the burial. Within weeks, disturbing reports emerged from the Imperial Harem. Several of the concubines who had been pregnant at the time of Murad's death gave birth in the weeks following Mehmed's accession. Under the law of fratricide, these newborn sons were also threats to the throne. According to later Ottoman chronicles and European diplomatic reports, at least 5 additional infants were quietly strangled in the months following the initial massacre, bringing the total death toll to approximately 24. Sultan Mehmed III had secured his throne, but the price would haunt him and the empire for the remainder of his reign. The voices of the mothers are almost entirely absent from the Ottoman chronicles. Court historians recorded the deaths of the princes in dry, bureaucratic language, noting the executions as legal and necessary. But they did not record the grief of the women who had borne these children, raised them in the gilded confinement of the harem, and watched them die. For their stories, we must turn to European sources, particularly the accounts of travellers and diplomats who had access to palace servants and who recorded what they heard. One of the most detailed accounts comes from Ottaviano Bon, Venetian bailo to Constantinople from 1604 to 1607, who wrote extensively about the Ottoman harem in his description of the Grand Seigneur's seraglio. Though Bon arrived nearly a decade after Mehmed's accession, he interviewed palace officials and former servants who had witnessed the events of 1595. Bon wrote, "When the new sultan ascends, all his brothers are strangled with bowstrings of silk, and their mothers, if they are not the sultan's mother, are sent away from the palace with small pensions. The grief of these women is beyond description. They are forbidden to weep openly or to show their sorrow publicly, for to do so would be seen as treason against the sultan, and so they grieve in silence, locked in their chambers, their sons buried before them." Another account comes from Paul Ricoeur, an English diplomat and historian who published The History of the Turkish Empire in 1680. Ricoeur interviewed elderly servants who had served in Topkapi Palace during Mehmed's reign. He recorded, "It is said that the mothers of the murdered princes were assembled in the harem courtyard after the executions and informed that their sons had been buried according to Islamic law and that they were to pray for their souls. Some of the mothers fainted. Others wailed until they were forcibly silenced by the eunuch guards. One woman, a Circassian who had borne the youngest infant, reportedly went mad with grief and was confined to a chamber in the harem, where she died within a year. The fate of these concubines varied. Those who had borne daughters were allowed to remain in the harem, serving the new sultan's household, or if they were older, retiring to the Eskisare, the old palace, where former concubines and palace women lived on pensions. But mothers of the murdered princes were a political liability. They might harbour resentment, seek revenge, or become focal points for opposition. According to European sources, several were married off to provincial governors or military officials, a common Ottoman practice for disposing of inconvenient harem women. Others simply disappeared from the records, their fates unknown. Only one woman emerged from the massacre with her power intact, Safiye Sultan, the Sultan's mother. As Valide Sultan, the Queen Mother, Safiye now held the second most powerful position in the empire, after her son. She moved into the Valide Sultan's chambers in the harem, richly appointed rooms overlooking the Bosphorus, and assumed control of the harem administration. European diplomats noted that she attended meetings of the Divan, the Imperial Council, speaking from behind a latticed screen. She arranged marriages, accepted bribes from foreign ambassadors, and effectively governed the empire during periods when her son was incapacitated by melancholy or illness. Some historians argue that Safiye was the driving force behind the fratricide, that she pushed her reluctant son to execute the law immediately to eliminate any chance of rebellion. Others suggest Mehmed acted independently, following legal precedent. What is certain is that Safiye benefited immensely from the deaths of her son's brothers, and she showed no public remorse. When European ambassadors raised the issue of the executions in diplomatic meetings, Safiye reportedly replied that Ottoman law was not subject to Christian judgment, and that the stability of the empire was worth any price. But in the dark corridors of the Imperial Harem, where 19 mothers mourned in enforced silence, the price was counted in tears, not thrones. The news of the fratricide reached European capitals within weeks. Venetian dispatches travelled quickly via merchant galleys across the Adriatic to Venice, where they were copied and forwarded to Rome, Vienna, Paris and Madrid. By mid-February 1595, every major court in Christendom knew what had happened all in Constantinople, and the reaction was one of unified horror. Pope Clement VIII, in a public address at the Vatican, condemned the executions as evidence of Ottoman barbarism and called on Christian princes to unite against the Turks. Habsburg Emperor Rudolf II, whose domains bordered Ottoman territories in Hungary, used the fratricide as propaganda, commissioning pamphlets and broadsheets that depicted Mehmed as a bloodthirsty tyrant who murdered innocent children. These pamphlets, printed in German, Latin and Italian, circulated widely across Central Europe. One particularly inflammatory broadsheet, preserved in the Austrian National Library, shows a crude woodcut illustration of 19 small coffins with the caption, "Thus the Turkish Sultan secures his throne with the blood of innocents." The Venetian Senate debated the diplomatic implications. Venice maintained a delicate balance between trade relationships with the Ottoman Empire and political alliances with Catholic Europe. Ambassador Lorenzo Bernardo's dispatches presented a dilemma. Should Venice condemn the fratricide and risk Ottoman retaliation, or remain silent and face criticism from the Pope and Habsburg allies? The Senate ultimately chose pragmatism. Officially, Venice expressed no opinion. Privately, Venetian merchants and diplomats quietly distanced themselves from the Ottoman court, reducing diplomatic visits and cancelling planned trade missions. French King Henry IV, a Protestant convert to Catholicism who sought Ottoman alliance against the Habsburgs, faced similar tensions. Henry's advisors argued that condemning the fratricide would alienate a strategically valuable ally. but French public opinion, inflamed by Catholic preachers and anti-Ottoman propaganda, demanded a response. Henry compromised by issuing a vague statement expressing sorrow at the loss of young lives without directly criticizing Ottoman law. This satisfied neither side and damaged his reputation among both Catholic hardliners and Ottoman officials. Perhaps the most detailed European analysis came from the pen of Giovanni Moro, another Venetian diplomat who served in Constantinople in the late 1590s. In his Relazione, a formal report submitted to the Venetian Senate in 1600, Moro wrote extensively about the law of fratricide. He argued that while Europeans viewed the practice as barbaric, it served a rational political purpose in the Ottoman system. The Turks believe that civil war is the greatest evil that can befall a state, far worse than the death of several princes. They point to the wars of succession that have plagued Christian kingdoms, the Wars of the Roses in England, the conflicts between Valois and Bourbon in France, and argue that their law prevents such disasters. We may find their method abhorrent, but we cannot deny that the Ottoman Empire has never suffered a protracted civil war over succession. Moro's analysis was controversial. Some Venetian senators accused him of justifying infanticide. Others acknowledged his point, but argued that Christian morality demanded alternative solutions, such as exile or monastic confinement. The debate reflected a broader European struggle to reconcile Enlightenment rationalism, which could see the pragmatic logic behind Ottoman law, with Christian moral absolutism, which declared the murder of innocents always and everywhere wrong. Meanwhile, within the Ottoman Empire, reaction was more muted. The law of fratricide was accepted as legal and religiously sanctioned. Ottoman subjects did not question the Sultan's right to execute his brothers, any more than medieval European subjects questioned a king's right to execute traitors. But there were signs of disquiet. The Janissaries, elite troops whose loyalty was essential to the Sultan's power, reportedly grumbled that Mehmed lacked the military prowess of his ancestors, and that killing 19 defenseless children was not the act of a warrior. Some provincial governors privately expressed concern that such a massive fratricide might destabilize the succession in future generations by creating resentment within the royal family. These concerns would prove prophetic. Sultan Mehmed III reigned for 8 years, from 1595 until his death in 1603. His reign was marked by military failures, administrative corruption, and personal instability. Unlike his warrior ancestors who led armies into battle, Mehmed remained in Constantinople, delegating military command to generals. In 1596, he did lead the Ottoman army in the Battle of Korestes in Hungary, one of the largest battles of the long Turkish war against the Habsburgs. The Ottomans technically won, but the victory was costly and failed to achieve strategic objectives. European chroniclers noted that Mehmed seemed terrified during the battle and had to be physically restrained from fleeing the field. His health deteriorated rapidly. Ottoman sources describe recurring bouts of melancholy and physical illness. Some historians speculate that Mehmed suffered from what we would now recognize as depression and anxiety, possibly exacerbated by guilt over the fratricide. He increasingly relied on his mother Safia Sultan to govern, a fact that irritated the Grand Vizier and military commanders who resented a woman's influence over imperial policy. Mehmed died in December 1603 at age 37. The cause was officially listed as illness, though some European sources speculated he was poisoned by political rivals. His death triggered another succession crisis, but this time the outcome was different. Mehmed had only one surviving son, 13-year-old Shehzadeh Ahmed, who ascended as Sultan Ahmed I. Ahmed faced a dilemma. The law of fratricide demanded he execute his only surviving brother, Shehzadeh Mustafa, who was still a child. But Ahmed also recognized that killing Mustafa would leave the dynasty with no backup heir if Ahmed himself died young. In a decision that shocked the Ottoman establishment, Ahmed refused to execute Mustafa. Instead, he confined him to the cafes and declared that fratricide would no longer be mandatory. This marked the beginning of the end for the law of fratricide. Future sultans continued to confine potential rivals in the cafes, but execution was reserved for active rebellion, not preemptive elimination. The last documented fratricide under Ottoman law occurred in 1651, when Sultan Mehmed IV executed his mentally ill brother Ibrahim. After that, the practice quietly faded. Historians debate why Ahmed abolished the law. Some credit him with moral enlightenment or religious scruple. Others argue he had no choice. With no other sons, killing Mustafa would risk ending the dynasty if Ahmed died without heirs. Still others point to changing political realities. By the early 17th century, the Janissaries and administrative bureaucracy had become powerful enough to manage succession without mass fratricide. The empire no longer depended entirely on the personal authority of the Sultan, but the legacy of Mehmed III's fratricide endured. European propaganda used the 19 coffins as a symbol of Ottoman cruelty for centuries. Ottoman historians, by contrast, largely ignored the moral dimensions, treating the executions as unremarkable applications of established law. And in the mausoleum of Sultan Mehmed III at Hagia Sophia, 19 small graves remain, silent witnesses to a night when the pursuit of political stability consumed 19 lives before they had truly begun. On January 27, 1595, 19 Ottoman princes died to secure one man's throne. Their names, recorded in the Ottoman chronicles, deserve to be spoken aloud. Shehzade Mustafa, Shehzade Mahmud, Shehzade Ahmed, Shehzade Osman, Shehzade Bayezid, Shehzade Jahangir, Shehzade Selim, Shehzade Suleiman, Shehzade Abdullah, Shehzade Alauddin, Shehzade Yusuf, Shehzade Hussein, Shehzade Korkut, Shehzade Mehmed, Shehzade Orhan Selim, Shehzade Murad, Shehzade Omer, Shehzade Ibrahim, and one unnamed infant, too young to have been registered in the palace records before he died. These were not abstract political casualties. They were children. They played in the gardens of Topkapi Palace. They studied the Quran with palace tutors. They were taught calligraphy, poetry, horsemanship. Some may have dreamed of becoming sultans themselves. Others may have wished only to escape the palace and live free lives. We will never know. Their futures were erased in a single night by a law that valued stability over humanity. The law of fratricide raises uncomfortable questions that transcend any single culture or religion. When does political necessity justify moral atrocity? Can a legal system absolve individuals of responsibility for acts that violate fundamental human decency? And who speaks for the victims when the law itself declares their deaths necessary and just? These questions haunted Europe in the 16th century, as they haunt us today. But there is also a lesson in the law's eventual abolition. Ahmed I, raised in the shadow of his father's fratricide, chose a different path. He proved that precedent is not destiny, that traditions can be changed, and that even in an absolute monarchy, individuals can refuse to perpetuate cruelty. His decision did not undo the deaths of the 19 princes, but it prevented future massacres. This has been the documented case of Mehmed III and the law of fratricide, preserved in Venetian diplomatic archives, Ottoman court chronicles, and European eyewitness accounts. If you found this history valuable, share it with others who seek to understand the past without mythology or sanitization. Next week, we return to medieval Europe to examine the systematic abuse documented in English ecclesiastical records from the 13th century. Subscribe so you do not miss it. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and never forget, the most brutal laws in history were often the ones societies declared necessary. Thank you for bearing witness. This is Dark Crowns.